March 11, 2017, 3 a.m., Valrico, Florida. Alisa Matthewson was sleeping in her bed. Suddenly, she felt something was off and she sat up with her two youngest children, 7-year-old Bryn and 5-year-old Grady, snuggled up beside her when she felt something cold dripping on her face. The room was pitch black. There was a man in her room standing over her, uninvited, and breaking into her home. Panic set in and she screamed, throwing whatever she could from her nightstand to defend herself. But the man didn't stop or hesitate. He grabbed her ankles and yanked her out of bed. The noise woke the kids and they ran out of the room, screaming. At that moment, Alisa had no idea what would have to go through in the next 55 hours. What happened to her after that, and who did this to her? And most importantly, why? Alisa Matthewson and Trevor Summers met each other in 1995, when they were both still in high school in suburban Philadelphia. They had been dating for a few years and got married in 2001. They wanted to build a life together with family at the heart of it all. They had 5 kids, Arden, Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper. At first, everything seemed perfect. Trevor was pleasant and caring, building up a warm, vibrant home full of family days, game nights, and parties. Alisa stayed home and dedicated herself completely to her family. Over time, everything changed. What appeared to be an American dream became more of a nightmare. Trevor jumped from one venture to another. Landscaping, pool design, real estate, never sticking with any of it. Each one ended up half-finished and the money problems just kept piling up. The family never stayed in one place. They moved from Pennsylvania to Florida, then to Vegas, California, and then back to Florida again. Alisa did her best to keep things stable for the kids, homeschooling them and trying to keep life as normal as possible. But slowly, Trevor's behavior began to change. He became more controlling, imposing rules on Alisa that seemed to grow stricter by the day. She couldn't wear what she wanted, couldn't talk to men, couldn't even sit near them in public. It isolated her, both socially and emotionally, and left her walking on eggshells all the time, trying to avoid triggering his temper. Things weren't much better with Trevor's business dealings either. Alisa overheard enough to get the sense that some shady financial things were going on. Bounced checks, unpaid debts, all sorts of trouble. A lot of times, Trevor got himself arrested also. But Trevor was always quick to play it cool, making it sound like a non-issue, blaming other people, or saying it was some sort of misunderstanding. Even so, Alisa knew the truth. Things weren't right, but she felt trapped trying to hold it all together, frightened by what might happen if she didn't. By 2016, Alisa couldn't take it anymore. She had been manipulated and controlled for years. So she filed for divorce, but Trevor tried to shame her into staying, to which she yielded initially, but things worsened, and then he took away her car and phone. She became trapped in the house with no means of escape. Alisa then realized she was indeed living in an abusive relationship. She knew it was time to start planning her escape. On the other hand, Alisa had no idea what Trevor was really planning. One day, when Trevor left for work, she grabbed her chance and called a domestic violence helpline. It was the first time in weeks she'd been able to talk to someone alone. She told them about the nightmare she had been living, and they told her it was serious. But before she could act on it, Trevor came home early, went into a rage, and stopped her from leaving. After a tense standoff, he finally gave in and let her take the kids and leave. She ran to a friend's place, but Trevor kept showing up uninvited, making her feel all trapped again. A week later, Alisa packed herself and her children into their clothes and moved into a women's shelter. She lost everything except what she could fit into a couple of plastic bags. For the next couple of months, she pieced together life. She found a new apartment, got a car, landed a job, and even filed for divorce. She even tried her luck in online dating. But Trevor's presence in her life wasn't going away. They had shared custody of the kids, so twice a week she had to meet him to exchange, which kept him in her life in a way she could not escape. By January 2017, Trevor appeared to have put things in perspective. Then came the month of February, and with it, Alisa was off to Trevor's apartment to sign divorce papers. But that's when Trevor burst her bubble. He claimed that he had cheated on her and also that things in his life were a complete disaster. His business was crashing, and so were legal cases against him, some of which even involved wire fraud charges. Just as Alisa was about to leave, Trevor snapped and he told her, "You're not going anywhere," pulled out a machete and held it up to her chest and throat. He told her to stay still and listen to him, promising not to tie her up if she did. Then he held her hostage for hours. It had been hours of tense back and forth, but eventually Alisa managed to calm Trevor down. She promised she wouldn't call the police, but as soon as she was free, she broke that promise and dialed 911. When the police talked to Trevor, he flat out denied threatening her. And since there wasn't any physical evidence, no bruises or marks to back up her side of things, the cops were a little skeptical of her story. Sergeant Christopher Steele from Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office approached with caution, as he already knew things were complicated. But things there went just much worse. Both Alisa and Trevor got a restraining order from each other. Alisa accused him that Trevor was using her kids against her, explaining to them that she lied to the cops and tried to get locked up with him. He also continued telling them that she had messed up their marriage by cheating on him. Trevor played the role of the heartbroken husband, making Alisa look like the bad guy in front of their kids. But then came a real shocker. Alisa found out that Trevor had roped their child, Arden, into vandalizing her house. One day she came home to a total mess, graffiti on the walls and Kool-Aid spilled all over her bed. Alisa admitted the Kool-Aid was Trevor's idea, but the chalk writing on the walls, things like traitor and thanks for being an ass, was all Arden's doing. She was devastated to find out it was Arden. Despite all the drama, Arden called, apologized, and said they wanted to talk things out and spend some time together. A few days later, Arden showed up with Bryn and Grady, while Cooper and Landon stayed with Trevor. Alisa felt like things might be getting better, thinking Arden was finally coming around. What she didn't know was that Trevor was still playing his mind games, telling Arden he hoped to fix things and get the family back together. March 10, 2017. Trevor had been pulling the strings for a while, and it all came to a head that evening. Arden had, as instructed by Trevor, left a window cracked open at Alisa's house as an indicator that it was all clear for him to enter. She and Landon sat in the car when Trevor made his way into Alisa's house in the dead of night through the window. Alisa woke to freezing water dripping on her face. She knew right then something was wrong. Panic quickly started as Trevor pulled her by and led her into the living room. Her other kids, Grady and Bryn, who had been sleeping with her, woke up and screamed. Trevor wasn't having any of that. He barked at them to go back to the bedroom and stay there. Alisa, absolutely terrified, tried to run through the door, but Trevor caught her, throwing her back. She couldn't make sense of what was going on, her mind racing to figure out where Arden was. Meanwhile, Arden assumed everything would work out. The parents would talk calmly and finally come out, and they would head back to Trevor's place together. However, by 5 a.m., Trevor sent her a message saying the whole plan had changed. When Arden finally came inside, it was like nothing had happened. Alisa quickly realized that Arden wasn't planning on calling the cops or stepping in. She was just going along with Trevor's sick game. And that was when it hit Alisa, the gut-wrenching truth that Arden had been played by Trevor, and she'd chosen his side. Trevor just threw her onto the bed and restrained her with scarves, which was only the beginning. He uses Christmas lights, tying them around her even tighter to the bed frame, but still has something else in his bag to use. Trevor speaks up as this is going on to mention how he wants to get out of the country. He mentioned millions of dollars stored in secret offshore accounts, and that he had even rented a boat in anticipation of disappearing into international waters. Alisa did not buy any of that, but she knew that the best that she could do was just remain silent, listen attentively, and wait for the perfect time to escape. But things only got worse from there. Trevor assaulted Alisa twice, punching her. He threatened to kill her with a razor blade, making her fear for the loss of her life, and at one point, even drugged her with NyQuil. She was completely out of it, drowsy and feeling pain from being tied up too tight. Then Trevor made her unlock her phone with her thumb, filming videos to make some kind of alibi. In one video, he claimed that Alisa was virtually unharmed, but you could see the bruises all over her. Around 5:40 p.m., Trevor returned and attempted to suffocate Alisa. He placed a pillow over her face and pressed down with his body, weighing on it hard. But somehow later she regained consciousness and begged Trevor for her life, telling him she would go with him to the boat, to buy some time and figure out how to escape. Then Trevor dragged her out and threw into her SUV, her hands still tied up. They made a stop at a Walgreens to grab some more cold medicine. And that's when Alisa realized it was now or never. She saw her chance to get away, opened the car door, and ran across the parking lot. But Trevor wasn't far behind. He chased her down, caught her, and shoved her back into the vehicle. One of the employees at Walgreens witnessed the whole thing go down and immediately called the cops, giving them the details about the dark blue SUV and its license plate. That was the turning point of this case. The sheriff's deputies in Hillsborough County didn't waste any time. They traced the vehicle to Alisa Summers and put out a statewide search. While they were on the run, Trevor was furious, and he screamed at Alisa, trying to get her to give up and attempt to run away, saying she did not love him anymore. He drove for hours, taking the back roads near the Tampa Bay coastline, stopping a few times along the way, including a rural area where they camped out for more than a day. It was during this time that Trevor wrote letters confessing to everything he had done and leaving disturbing messages for their kids. One of the notes said, "We should have never gone down the road of divorce. It tore our family apart. So we've ended it for your sake, and we'll be watching you from heaven." Alisa also told the authorities Trevor raped her 2 more times, that they were stuck out there. The entire time, her mind has been focused on survival, because she kept telling herself repeatedly to make it out alive. On the morning of 13th of March, Trevor drove them to Little Harbor, a resort area they had visited in the past as a family. He pulled into the parking lot, backed up behind a dumpster, got into the back seat with Alisa, and then swung a rope over her head, yanking it tight around her neck in an attempt to strangle her. She was convinced that he was trying to kill her. Luckily, for some reason, Trevor freaked out that moment and jumped back into the driver's seat as they'd been spotted, and he zoomed off looking for another safe place to hide. Trevor finally pulled into a carport, and this time, in a shocking move, he used a razor blade to slit his own throat. Alisa, terrified, screamed at him to stop, but before she could do anything, finally enforcement showed up, guns drawn, surrounding the car. A deputy rushed over, helped Alisa out, and got her into the front seat of another car to take her to safety. Alisa later said that at that moment she felt as if she was pulled from hell, a complete turnaround from the nightmare she'd just lived through for 55 hours. Thankfully, she wasn't dead yet. Once she was safe, Alisa was taken to get medical help while investigators started gathering evidence from the scene and checking her injuries. She told them about the horrors she'd gone through. Meanwhile, Trevor had been in the hospital himself, nursing his self-inflicted wounds. As he recovered, he told the cops what he'd done, but with some odd twists. He said he only used some rope to tie Alisa up, and even tried to suffocate her with a pillow. He weirdly suggested that Alisa had just played along, acting as though she had consented to be bound and attacked. Trevor was hit with 11 charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, sexual battery, and child neglect. And to your surprise, he pleaded not guilty, and the case proceeded to court. After 5 years of arrest, the COVID-related delays among several others, his case was finally opened in 2022. The prosecution stated that all the actions of Trevor were premeditated and had an evil intent, whereas the defense claimed that he didn't have the intention to kill her, but was trying to reconcile with Alisa. In the court trial, Trevor's court-appointed lawyer, Anthony Marchese, portrayed him as courteous, but totally out of touch with reality of what he had done. Marchese argued that Trevor had difficulty distinguishing between someone saying yes and just giving in. Trevor, for his part, stuck to his story that he hadn't done anything wrong, even though the evidence against him was hard to ignore, including his own handwritten confessions and a videotaped admission. Then Alisa took the stand and shared the horrific details of her 55-hour nightmare. She testified that Trevor had undressed her and raped her. When asked why she did not resist, she simply said, "I didn't want to get hurt." One point in the trial saw Trevor decide to fire his lawyer and represent himself. This might look normal, but it has a horrible meaning. Because if that happens, Alisa had to face her attacker directly during cross-examination. And to worsen the matter, it happened. Trevor focused on this consent issue and drilled her for more than 4 hours in the courtroom. Despite an emotional strain, Alisa was strong. She was speaking to the jury and not him. As the case progressed, Alisa's testimonial was a clear and very powerful picture of what occurred, with moments that would stand out as crucial in the case. Trevor's defense team attempted to poke holes into the story that Alisa and the prosecution were telling. Trevor even made his kids come up to stand in court. Though they did not air this part of it on camera, he first asked his 13-year-old daughter, Bryn, if she remembered yelling anything at her mom during that whole incident. He then looked at his eldest daughter, Arden, and asked her if she had ever walked in to see him and Alisa fighting. Arden answered quickly in the negative, as she'd never seen anything like that. It was evident that Trevor was trying to portray that his home was a peaceful one and that Alisa was making it up when talking about what occurred. Then Sergeant Edward Ramia appeared to discuss his interview with Trevor after Trevor had stabbed himself with a knife. The defense immediately pounced on the timing of the interview, suggesting that Trevor was still in no condition to respond to questions right after the incident. Trevor himself has gotten up and asked the sergeant to see if he had seen him before the surgery, upon which the sergeant said he didn't know anything about it. Trevor also pointed out the cut on his neck, stitches as well as bandages, which was also a self-inflicted cut during that 55 hours. But the sergeant did not view these cuts as a big one, since the stitches did not count as surgery. That led to some sort of back and forth where Trevor suggested that the sergeant was not taking his situation seriously. But the real drama came when Trevor decided to question his ex-wife and kids. This seemed to raise a lot of eyebrows. Was he trying to torture them mentally, or was it just a way to prove his innocence and show that he still had control? The method he used to ask questions from his kids about the events of that night drew a lot of people's skepticism as to whether he was only twisting their words to benefit himself. In the final arguments, they described Trevor as that guy who could not even get himself past divorce. But this was contradicted by the defense in that Trevor was confused during the weekend in which that happened, making it a fragile situation. Trevor did not testify, however, his attorneys did. They pointed to the lack of physical evidence inside Alisa's house. Broken glass was nowhere to be seen. There were no dents in the walls, not a single scratch on the countertops, and no traces of blood. Maybe what happened didn't happen just the way Alisa described. Now it was up to the jury to decide how they'd interpret all this, and that's the good part. They found Trevor guilty on all the 11 charges, and he was sentenced with 3 consecutive life terms, plus 224 years. Alisa said that she felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders after the verdict, especially with Jeff Matthewson by her side. She met Jeff after the attack in 2017, and he had been her rock ever since. They even got married in 2018, and through it all, Jeff was there, supporting her emotionally every step of the way. In court at sentencing, Alisa and her children testified about the long-lasting pain Trevor's actions caused. In particular, Arden said with considerable emotion that she was also manipulated by her father into getting involved in the attack. She grappled with a great deal of guilt, but eventually she found peace when others reassured her that she was not to blame. Afterward, Alisa moved forward by focusing on healing and taking care of herself. She started an insurance business as well as became a major activist for creating awareness about abuse within relationships. So what do you think about this case? Do you find her journey inspiring, or do you want to sympathize with Trevor for some reason? Feel free to share your thoughts with us and subscribe to this channel for more true crime content. See you soon.